Meet Senthil Padmanabhan, Vice President and Technical Fellow at eBay. He leads the private cloud platform supporting over 4,000 engineers and one of the world's largest e-commerce marketplaces. We talk about how his team is applying GenAI to real engineering workflows and why he's not chasing the hype.
Good afternoon, Senthil. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to our discussion today around how you have specifically used AI and increased your developer productivity on your team. Could you talk to us a little bit about that today and tell us how you're doing it?
Oh, thanks, Felix, for having me. I'm delighted to be here. So I run platform and infrastructure at eBay, and so it's basically everything below our application software and above our hardware and networking. And eBay runs its own cloud, so there's a lot of emphasis on infrastructure too. And since we run the platform, we are also responsible for engineering velocity across the whole company. And one of the core areas that is developer productivity. But the last 2 years, things have changed with GenAI, and that has added a whole new thing into how we do things, right? So broadly, I can say the developer productivity, we split it into 3 areas. One is day-to-day coding. This is where our software engineers spend their time in their IDEs and they contribute and author software. The next, I would call it as workflows or tasks which have specific outcomes, like software upkeep and like migrations and things like that. And lastly, we also have a discovery platform. You know that engineers only spend a portion of their time coding. Most of the time is in questioning, why is my server not starting? How do I fix this exception? And so we want to build a solution to solve that too. And that's where GenAI really plays a good role.
I'd love to understand, for instance, from a UAT perspective and testing perspective, how are you doing that automation? How are you actually using AI to help you develop those use cases and test it faster?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things I would say. One of the things for eBay or any e-commerce player is how do you have a good test data in place, right? We found this problem a couple of years back where it is almost impossible for us to create the same high quality data set in a testing environment as it's in production, because it's easy to create 1 or 2 SKUs, right? But if you want this shirt which has this red color of size XL, I mean, it's just impossible because the permutation combination is so huge, and especially for a company like eBay where the scale is like immense. So that's one area where we do is we move data from production to staging on a daily basis. Staging is our test environment, and that's AI is used and applied AI where we do a privacy preserving encoding where the data still, a zip code still has to be a zip code, but it should not be the zip code of the real customer. The state, you can't just the garbage the data in, right? So we need to make sure that the format is preserved and yes, privacy is maintained. So that's an area where AI is used. The other areas that I would say is we use AI a lot to fix flaky tests these days. Like, I mean, that's one of the most frustrating points for engineers across the company. And AI is used in those areas on identifying those use cases and things. And more importantly, after the GenAI thing, there is like whenever there is an RCA required or is a root cause analysis required or whenever there is a log analysis that required, we have an AI summary everywhere in our portals which clearly summarizes what it is and go and fix the actual issue. So that's some of the areas where I could say that it's there. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in your article, Cutting Through the Noise, you did a lot of really good research around how developer productivity can be increased through RAG, through LLM training, through all sorts of different techniques. Could you summarize that for me and tell me what some of those core conclusions were?
Yeah. So let me start with this, right? The first thing I would say is Copilot, right? That's GitHub Copilot.
Yes.
So in 2023 is when we wanted to do an experiment within the company to see whether Copilot actually makes a big difference or not. We took 300 developers in the company. 150 was in a control bucket without Copilot, and 150 were in a test bucket with Copilot enabled. And so these developers were like from similar code bases, similar software stack, so that it's not a biased test. And we ran the test for 6 weeks. So after the end of the 6 weeks, we saw that people in the test bucket, which Copilot enabled, had a 17% decrease in their pull request merge times or code review and merge times. and a 12% decrease in the lead time to change. That's the time when you commit when you submit a PR and the time it goes to production. So there was some correlation, good correlation in terms of reducing times, right? 12%, 17%, these are all good numbers. And this motivated us to enable it across the company. Now, Copilot is enabled for any developer in the company, and at least 75% of the developers are using it on a day-to-day basis. So that was a big finding for us. Of course, when you scale it out to the whole company, you may not see the exact benefits that are the exact numbers that you see in a tested environment, but it was still very impressive on what we saw. But to me, the more important thing is, see, in any technology organization or any software company, if you say, they have to do software upkeep. I mean, this is like you keeping up with the latest versions of all your programming languages, of your frameworks, of your stack, right? And if you don't do it, you're left behind. And this is what I'm talking about, is like, how do you upgrade to the latest version of Java, Node, Python, or all your frameworks, right? And people don't realize that this is what is holding them back. I mean, whenever tech debt builds up because you're not in the latest version, your software release process becomes slow. And addressing tech debt makes you go faster today and not in the future, because there is also this perception, right? You address tech debt, the returns may come sometime in the future. That's not the case anymore. And we see it, right? You go to the latest version of Java, for example, or JDK, you immediately see the benefits. You don't have to wait for a long time. So in eBay, we spend approximately 10 to 15% of the overall engineering allocation across the whole company on something called essential engineering, which is to modernize the software stack and keep it up to date. And our goal is to reduce the time spent, because this is the thing that you have to do, but not everybody enjoys doing it, right? Like, they want to build products, they want to do the things that customer wants to do. So last year we did this. We upgraded our whole application fleet from an older version of JDK to a newer version, JDK 8 to JDK 17. The first 3 months we did a rules-based tooling and like manual effort to do that. And then we used fine-tuning with that already a good data set that we had. And after that, in addition to our rules-based tooling, that made the whole process 25% faster.
Wow.
Okay. And then we tried to do it for whole Spring Boot 2.7 to 3, and that was 30% faster. So this was a good gain, right? And that's right there, because developers do not enjoy doing these tasks a lot, and any percentage point you get optimizing that, it's going to be really good. Another thing, if you see in big technology organization, you have a lot of custom DSLs, domain-specific languages. I mean, these are systems that author capabilities within your company. For example, eBay has a system for authoring our risk rules. Like, hey, if the user signs in n number of times, and they incorrectly sign in, you put a captcha or you have some rules there, right? And that's a declarative language, and that gets super complicated over time, that authoring those rules.
Yes.
And we did a fine-tuning again over there with some few examples, and that made this whole authoring process 50% faster. Right? Again, it's limited to one domain, but it's still good news, right? So in eBay, we have a system called HubGPT internally. It's very similar to ChatGPT, and it uses a combination of RAG with all our systems, along with a vendor called Glean. And that has become one of the most popular internal products. Last year alone, around 1.7 million questions were answered by the tool across employees. So this has questions from, hey, where do I find my paycheck, to why is my badge not working, and like all these questions that employees have. And specifically for developers, it answers around 8,000 questions per week. And imagine, right, these questions in the past were either sent as a Slack message to some other developer or some other team, or set up a meeting. Like, all this is wasted minutes, right? Like, this is all information that's already there in the system, but like any other company, there is no one place to go and figure it out. But now with these RAG-based systems, we can figure it out. So again, it was a huge productivity boost for us. Again, there are many areas within our product line also where we are leveraging it. Yeah.
That's really interesting that you're doing both a RAG architecture for internal use as well as fine-tuning.
Yeah.
What would you recommend for others that are trying to get into this journey? Because there's always those that are instantly jumping to their RAG solutions and building out that architecture versus a fine-tuning model.
Yes, I would. So I can see that. If you ask me, right, there is one thing that I figured out in my experience in the last couple of years is data quality matters much more than the quantity, and that's already proven with all these new things with the DeepSeek and others like that. It's happening, right? So if you go beyond foundational models, and if you're talking about post-training or fine-tuning or even few-shot prompting, having just a handful of really high-quality curated data sets is enough to change a generic model or a general model to an expert model. So at any point in time, I would prefer 1,000 high-quality records over 10,000 or 100,000 average records, right? I think that was one big learning that people have to realize, that You just need a couple of them, enough to make yourself an expert in that space. In fact, one of the things that I really liked was I think in December, OpenAI made this announcement called reinforcement fine-tuning.
Yes.
You probably heard about that, right? And where they just take a dozen of good data sets and create an expert model, and where they have inbuilt graders which go and validate the responses with another validation set you give, which is independent. That's what it's reinforcement. Right? It's independent of the original set you did. Like that in the earlier days we used to use supervised fine-tuning. It's not the case anymore. So I think that will be an example that I would say, right? I think first.
But doesn't that reinforcement then, to your point, data quality needs to be at a certain level.
Yeah.
But reinforcement learning does allow you to essentially have AI determine what's clean, what's not clean.
Correct, that's true. And that's why the independent validation set really helps here too, right? And a lot of teams don't use AI for the sake of using AI too. I think that's another thing. There is so much of hype around this thing. And that's one of our bigger learning, right? That is, we go through this hype and doom cycles within the company. Initially, it was, everything has to change. Like in November 2022, when ChatGPT, we know it's profound, it's going to be a paradigm shift, but then everybody has stopped doing everything, change everything. But that's not how it works, because it follows a typical S curve like any other thing. So initially it's all hype, and then it withers off, and then real use cases emerge, and that's what is happening now. We are moved from excitement to execution, I would say, and eventually there's rapid growth, right? And so we need to see how it goes. But now it's all about anything we do in the company. We ask, will GenAI make a difference? If it makes a difference, let's use it. If not, don't just go behind the shiny thing. And it's more about the impact rather than the hype or the doom.
Yes. You're right. There are a lot of shiny things in AI today. And it's very hard to tell what's going to be the next big thing.
Right.
But in your mind, what are you experimenting with that is starting to show that next level of hype, but really reaching that full potential?
Right. I talked about fine-tuning, right? Again, I'll go back to my original theme. I think having a bunch of records is enough, and as models become better and better, a foundation model itself with just few short prompting should be enough for you to make a good use case out of you, right? There are a couple of techniques I would highlight. One is called sketchy moment matching, SKMM. It's a technique that's newly introduced from NYU, New York University, where they select only certain data points from your data set, and it helps in data pruning, right? So when you select the most important data points, it makes it less memory intensive and more quicker. So that's a very good technique that we are trying to leverage for anything fine-tuning, and it doesn't have the other overheads of how a fine-tuning system comes into play. It's a very simple one that we do. Another one called DAFT. Again, it's called domain aware fine-tuning, DAFT, D-A-F-T. And that again uses a very similar thing where it enhances the model's adaptability to new domains by encoding that information of the domain during the fine-tuning process, like it did. So these are other techniques, and there is always LoRa, the technique that's been there quite some time for fine-tuning. So I would say that the world is moving where foundational models, or the basic models that come out of the gate itself, are extremely good, and you only need some minor tweaks to it, and you don't have to have the overhead of doing this whole post-training or like large-scale fine-tuning anymore. I think that's what I would say.
Yes. So what's one piece of advice, since we both run large engineering teams, that you would give to an engineering leader to say, here's an instant solution to make your team more productive?
That's a very tricky one. See, I think the problem with this space is this, Felix, like, I keep telling that you go out for a week on a vacation, you come back, you feel you're outdated. It feels like you are a newcomer in this field, right? The field moves very fastly. But as I said, it doesn't matter, right? Because you don't have to worry about the 1,000 things happening there, because you have a company, you have a mission, you have specific goals. So my advice to a lot of folks that are thing is, think about use cases that really matter and focus on that. Yeah, you need to read up and catch up, but you don't have to do every day, and because if something is important, it's going to stay, and then you can catch it up eventually too. When you have your AI strategy, think about the future potential state rather than the current state of things when you build up this whole strategy for your company, right? For example, we can assume that the cost of AI will become 100 times cheaper in the future, and at the same time become 100 times more powerful. And I think it's already happening. The cost is a race to the bottom, and the capabilities of these LLMs are exponentially increasing every 6 months. Then if you plan your application, the application that you're building with that mindset, with that future capability, then whenever these efficiency come in, you just have to plug in the gains and you have a competitive advantage, right? Because your balance sheet now may not be healthy because you're spending a lot. But once the efficiency comes, you will have a very healthy balance sheet, as well as you will be very competitively at an advantage. But conversely, if you don't do that, if you plan your strategy based on today's limitations, then you'll have a problem in the future when these gains come in and your competitors are all leveraging the gains and you have to change your whole strategy. So never plan around today's limitations. I think a lot of people are thinking that what's today is the capability, and we have been constantly proven that's wrong, because every 6 months the capability just keeps growing and the cost keeps going down. So I think that would be another piece of advice that's another one.
Yes,
that I would say.
That's a good one. We had this debate last night over dinner where, yes, although the cost of the compute is going to be going down, the amount of data, though, from enterprises like eBay that you're pushing into these models is only going up. Correct. And so we need that cost structure to come down. But what are your thoughts on that, as far as all this enterprise data entering into all of the model generation and training sets that we're creating these days?
So are you creating more data than the exponential growth power of the LLM? I think that's where the thing is. Because I don't think Moore's law applies to our data set as it applies to the power of an LLM. So
exactly.
So at any point in time, I would say LLM's capability is much more that's improving at the foundational level, and it can handle more and more data that you throw at it at any point in time. So I would not much worry about, I think, collect as much data as possible. I would more bet on things on how LLMs are going to become exponentially more powerful down the line, and not worry about other things.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I like to finish on is understanding from leaders like yourself what your life hack is from an AI perspective.
See the number of tasks that you do on a repeated basis. Any leader will do, right? For example, emails. I mean, a lot of leaders spend a lot of time in emails. I have this prompt that I authored, and which makes I don't have to think a lot in making sure my email is well polished and things like that. I just write the thoughts in my mind very quickly, and then this polishes it in a way. It's not prosaic, it's not overly professional, but it just makes it to the point that it has to be delivered. Try to see where you spend time and see whether GenAI makes a difference or not, and it will make a difference.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You're going to have to share that hack with me.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh,
Senthil.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, delighted.